The sandwich that we're giving to you today on the podcast starts with climate dads. Didn't know this was a term until Bloomberg introduced it to me last month in October. So
Wow.
they're like dads that are super into greening the family. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is not because I think it's like such a massive phenomenon. I doubt, like, by the numbers that it's so big, but it is cute. In the coverage that Bloomberg did of climate dads, they had some numbers on how they find that this is a part of a larger trend of dads getting more involved in parenting and household chores, and gave some numbers from the US and the UK. So I'd like to talk about those because they are dribbles of change, but change nonetheless. So the amount of time that US fathers have spent on unpaid childcare has doubled since 1965, from 1 hour per week to two.
I was going to say, like, this is one of these lying with statistics. It's gone from 1% to 2%.
Exactly. So that one I was like, okay, not much to write home about, right? Slightly more interesting, 5% of US families now have a stay-at-home parent who's male. That was 2% in 1994. So again, dribbles, but moving in a certain direction. The UK numbers are more inspiring, shall we say. In the UK, men now spend around 65% as much time as women on unpaid childcare, and that's up from 50% in 2015. So they're doing more than half of what the women are doing. Again, moving in the right direction. We're going to give them credit for that. In 2019 in the UK, 1 in 14 stay-at-home parents were men. Now it's 1 in 9.
Wow. Now that's an actual meaningful change statistically.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, dribbles. The caveat was dribbles. I just think that this has been one of the most slow-moving societal changes that feminism has been pushing for a long time. And I, I would, in the spirit of the Progress Network, like to point that out, even though the numbers are not particularly strong. Even the fact that Bloomberg is writing about this from a positive perspective, right? Climate dads as a thing is a change. I don't think that you would have seen that even in recent years, to talk about a subgenre of dadding, right?
Although your stats definitely are kind of we may be graduating from a dribble to a trickle. Like that's which eventually I suppose could become a torrent, but we are a ways away from either a steady flow or a torrent. That being said, there is a question of, should these things be equal, right? Should all of it be 50-50? Maybe it should be 50-50 on some sort of aggregate basis, even if it's not 50-50 on an individual basis, meaning there should be some sense of equity between home care and childcare overall, even if any individual family unit may vary widely. The question then is, like, how much, and how much do we allow for individual latitude, individual meaning individual family latitude? I think the thing that's been most problematic in the United States has been the absence of childcare, which we've talked about on a bunch of programs, the absence of affordable childcare for large swaths of middle income and lower income people, which has tended to fall most heavily on women. But it's a burden that is shared in the sense of it's an untenable economic burden for families, full stop. And that's an equal challenge to the individual. We will have an episode talking about Betty Friedan and the rise of second wave feminism. And yes, a lot of that change at that time that was focused on was individuals making the change, men believing that this is their responsibility, and women no longer believing that this was their sole responsibility or their primary work, as the case may be. But there is a larger social dynamic in that without adequate collective support, it's really, really difficult for individuals to even make these changes.
Sure. I mean, to get at your question of, do we want things to be 50-50? Or to put that another way, if things were 50-50, would that be a sign that we had arrived at the place that we want to arrive at? I think you really need to zoom in more on statistics like in the UK, men are now spending about 65% as much time as women on unpaid childcare. It depends what the situation at home is, right? Is there a stay-at-home parent? Are they both working? I think it's very easy if you have both parents working they should be spending around the same amount of time. I agree with you that's probably never going to be exactly the same. It's going to change depending on the intricacies of circumstance. But that one I think is an easy answer. The one that's a more difficult answer is the ratio of stay at home dads versus stay at home moms. What is the ideal number for that? I just, again, I think the easy one there is not 1 in 9 and not 1 in 14. Maybe it doesn't need to be 1 in 2. But I think we're far away from really actually asking those kinds of questions in a serious manner because the burden is so much more on women than on men for these kinds of things.
Well, I guess, here's to climate dads, a
Here's
term
the
that I
climate.
will now remember. I'm not sure I'll use it, but I'll remember it.
I mean, you're kind of climate dad. You're kind of like the OG climate dad.
It's, to some degree, yeah. But I never thought of it in those terms.